What's up, everybody? FTWitachi here. You know what it is. Thank you all very much for tuning in to our next World of Warcraft Shadowlands patch 9.1 Warlock guide, where today we will be getting into Soulbinding and all of the Soulbinds for each covenant for each spec, that being Destruction, Affliction, and Demonology. We have already released individual startup guides for Demonology, Destruction, and Affliction for patch 9.1, which has been updated since the last patch. We have also released guides to our covenants. We are now going into Soulbinds, and stay tuned for, of course, the last two areas of interest in Shadowlands, which is going to be conduits, which are tied into Soulbinds, which you'll understand in just a little bit, and of course legendaries. But stay tuned for those two guides, they will be out soon. However, let's get into what Soulbinding is all about. Soulbinding is a new system of progression in Shadowlands expansion, in which players who join a covenant will be able to bind themselves to one of its members, sharing some of their power through an artifact like Talent Tree. Each of the different covenants has 3 options to choose from. With that being 4 total covenants, that's going to give us a total of 12 different trees or 12 different options of progression to choose from. Conduits also add further customization, so I'll go ahead and give you guys where the conduits will be in place when we get into these soulbinding trees. However, stay tuned for the actual conduit guide. So, without further ado, let's get into each and every soulbind calculator so I can go ahead and give you guys the best playthrough and the best setup with each soulbind, and then towards the end I'll go ahead and go over with each soulbind which is best for each spec, that being Destruction, Demonology, and Affliction individually and separately. So without further ado, let's get into the Soulbind talent trees. Alright, so starting off with the Kyrian Covenant, we've got Pelagos, we've got Clea, as well as Forgelight. We're going to be starting off with the Pelagos talent tree. He is pretty straightforward, staying into the main path on the left. Just to give you a heads up, there are blank options throughout this talent tree, and that's where your conduits are going to go into. Now before we get started, I want to go ahead and give you guys a heads up on what these conduit signs mean. Starting off with the first one that we've got blinking, we've got 2 swords going through. That is a potency conduit slot, and this is going to affect your attacking and damaging type abilities. Next up, we got in the middle, we got a shield on this conduit. This is an endurance conduit slot, which is going to affect your defensive capabilities as well as healing. And then we got a finesse conduit slot, which as you can see on the right, with the little bit of a lightning bolt flare that we got going on there. These are going to be a little bit niche type conduits that are going to affect random abilities that aren't going to be so offensive and so defensive. They're just going to be very, very niche. And just to give you a heads up, as a Warlock, we want to go ahead and deal damage, so most of our pathing is going to be going straight into potency conduit options, because most of our conduits actually play a key role damage-wise, comparing them to some of the talent options that we have with these soulbinds. So starting off with Pelagos, of course, we're going to be taking his first ability of Combat Meditation, moving us into the first potency slot, which gives us Focusing Mantra. Defeating an enemy lowers the cooldown of your File of Serenity by 1 second. Now that is not amazing, but it is going to be better than the other 2 options that we have here, especially tied in with a potency conduit. If you're wondering what the other options were, Road of Trials, defeating an enemy grants 10% movement speed for 20 seconds. This effect is increased if defeating a powerful enemy. And then of course File of Patience. File of Serenity heals you for 35% additional health, but all the healing is done over 10 seconds. So of course these 2 could have had their options, their usage, but again, Focusing Mantra with a potency conduit definitely beats the other 2 options. Leading us into an endurance conduit. Here we got Bond of Friendship or Cleansed Vestments. I'm not going to go too much into details on these 2. However, defeating an enemy reduces the cooldown of your Steward's on-file services by 30 seconds. And in Cleansed Vestments, you have a chance to obtain Cleansed Cloth and Enchanting Materials when you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor. You can choose either or when it comes to these 2 options. Next up, we have a Potency Conduit, which is definitely key. And then we got an option of an Endurance or a Finesse Conduit. In most cases and situations, you're going to go with the Endurance Conduit option, as they do play a better role than the Finesse Conduits. Leading us into Let Go of the Past, which was his prior last and final ability. Now with patch 9.1, this leads us into a Potency Conduit, giving us the option of Better Together, which is during combat, moving within 3 yards of a party or raid member inspires both of you, increasing mastery by 40 for 1 minute. Players may only be affected by one such effect. Or Path of the Devoted. After recovering from a loss of control effect, you take 15% reduced damage, and movement speed cannot be reduced below 90% for 6 seconds, may only occur once per 30 seconds. Now I can see Path of the Devoted being nice for PvP situations, however, even though I still strongly suggest going with Better Together. That also leads us into an Endurance Conduit slot, which leads us to the final ability of New Found Resolve. We're going to be going into Clea's talent tree, and it is almost identical pathing. It is pretty much identical pathing to Pelagos. Also, this is usually going to be your second best option as well when it comes to soul binding within the Kyrian Covenant system. Next up, we're going to start off with Valiant Strikes, which is her main ability, leading us into an option of either a Potency or an Endurance Conduit. Of course, we're going to want to go with Potency, which leads us to Mentorship. While above 90% health, you increase nearby party members' maximum health by 5%. Or Ascended File, if we went the Endurance route. File of Serenity renders you immune to curse, disease, poisons, and bleed effects for 8 seconds. So, strongly suggest Mentorship over the Ascended File, of course, with the Potency Conduit, leading us into a Finesse Conduit. Now we got Cleansing Rites and Ever Forward. You can choose either one of these options. It doesn't matter. It is based off of your playstyle. It won't affect you too much. Cleansing Rites, after 5 seconds out of combat, gain a shield for 10% of your maximum health. I much prefer that over Ever Forward. While above 90% health, your mounted movement speed is increased by 10%. Now that is cool in outside world combat and all that type of stuff, but in most content you're going to be using Cleansing Rites. Giving us into an Endurance slot, leading us to either one of the 3 Conduit slots, but we're going to go with the Potency, which gives us Barrier's Pursuit. Your damaging spells and abilities have a chance to decrease your target's movement speed by 45% for 20 seconds. Now that is definitely high-end PvP, or it is definitely good, especially in PvE content where you have ads that do need to be slowed. Yes, you will probably find better options in Pointed Courage. Chance of critical strike is increased by 1% for every nearby enemy or ally, up to 5%. That doesn't outweigh the buff that you're going to get from a Potency Conduit, so that's why I'm going with Barrier's Pursuit. Or you could have went with Resonant Accolades. When receiving healing above 70% health, or healing an ally that's above 70% health, 4% of the healing done is repeated to the target over 5 seconds. Now, healing is healing. We're not really going to do too much about that as a Warlock, so we really had the options of Pointed Courage or Barrier's Pursuit, and then of course with the Potency Conduit tied in with Barrier's Pursuit. Even though not really great for PvE content, Barrier's Pursuit, it is still outweighs Pointed Courage, leading us into another Potency Conduit slot. Now we got Spirit of the Archon, or Hope Springs Eternal. Hope Springs is your File of Serenity reduces damage taken by 10% for 8 seconds, and its effects are granted to your lowest health ally. And then of course, Spear of Archon, movement speed increased by 6% while out of combat, which is cool. However, gain 3% crit chance for 10 seconds after damaging an enemy above 90% health. That is huge key compared to Hope, leading us into an Endurance slot, which is usually better than the Finesse option, leading us to the last ability, Light the Path. Last but not least, usually the option you're not going to choose as a Warlock within the Kyrian faction or the Kyrian Covenant is Forgelight Prime, meaning Mika Nikos. Starting off with his main ability of Bronze Call to Action, leading us into a Potency or an Endurance Conduit slot. Of course, as always, Potency into Forgelight Filter. When reduced below 35% health, your File of Serenity automatically heals you and consumes a charge or charge additive. File of Serenity also knocks back nearby enemies from within, away from you. Definitely Potency into Forgelight Filter. You get a Finesse option. You can choose either or, Regenerating Materials or Resilient Plumage. Regenerating Materials, casting or receiving healing, has a chance to improve the remaining durability of your armor, which is nice. However, I prefer Resilient Plumage. Fall damage decreased by 20%, and after taking fall damage you take is reduced by 20% for 15 seconds. You got an endurance conduit slot, which leads us into a potency, one of the three, but we're going to be going with the potency option, leading us into soul steel clamps. After 5 seconds of standing still, incoming stun and incapacitating durations are reduced by 20%, last for 5 seconds once you start moving. Again, not key when it comes to PvE content. It does have its usage in PvP content, but the potency outweighs the other two options. Also, just to give you a heads up, most of the abilities with Forge Light aren't the greatest, which is also why he's ranked the lowest out of the three. You could have went with Hammer of Genesis, which is damaging and your enemy grants you 3% haste for 10 seconds, stacks up to 5 stacks, which is very, very nice. It's the best option of these three, tied in with an endurance slot. However, I do prefer the potency conduit option. Or you could have got Sparkling Drift Globe Core. When reduced below 30% health, you stun nearby enemies for 3 seconds. The effect may only occur once every minute, or 60 seconds. Leading us into a potency slot, I'm going to be going with Soul Glow's Spectrometer. Damaging or healing a target and analyzes its merit over 15 seconds, increasing your damage or healing to it by 1%, increasing by an additional 1% every 3 seconds. Cannot start a new analysis of each type until the previous one has finished. So I strongly suggest Soul Glow over this one, reactive retrofitting. After taking physical or magic damage, gain a shield that absorbs damage equal to 8% of your maximum health for 10 seconds. Each incoming damage type may trigger this effect once per 30 seconds. PvP wise, reactive is cool. However, overall, Soul Glow Spectrometer is the better option. It also leads us into an endurance conduit slot, which I prefer over the finesse option, leading us to the last ability and the new ability of Effusive Anima Accelerator. Next up, we're going to be going into the Necrolord with the three soul binding options of Bonesmith, Hrimir. We've also got Plague Deviser, Merileth, and last but not least, Ameni. In patch 9.1, these three, or this covenant in general, has switched and flip-flopped big time. In fact, it has gone completely backwards to what it used to be. Each soulbind was very, very close in patch 9.0 and 9.0.5. However, Ameni is no longer the best option to choose from. In fact, Ameni is sadly the worst and has one of the cooler abilities as a soulbind that I'm sad to see go, which I'll go over in just a bit. However, let's start with it. Bonesmith is probably your best option for all three specs, so let's start with his main ability of Forgeborn Reveries, leading us to a potency or an endurance conduit slot. Of course, we're going potency into resourceful flesh crafting. Fleshcraft's passive effect reduces the cooldown by an additional 1 second when it consumes a corpse. Could have gone with Serrated Spalders. Inflict damage, shadow damage to your attacker over 5 seconds when hit at melee range. However, comparing that to a potency conduit, the potency conduit outweighs that. And then of course, doesn't really matter with the endurance slot into the resourceful flesh crafting. Resourceful flesh crafting is not that bad. Leading us into a finesse option, you could choose either or Rune Forging or Bonesmith Satchel. Bonesmith Satchel gives you a chance to obtain a satchel of Bonesmith's preferred ores and gems when you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor. However, I like Rune Forged Spurs. Mounted movement speed is increased by 5%. If attacked while mounted, mounted movement speed is increased by an additional 10%, totaling that to 15, which is pretty good. Endurance Conduit slot leading you into a potency, endurance, and finesse option. This is very close on this one. It is either going to be the potency or the endurance slot, and I'll get to that in just a second. The finesse option, Hrimir's Arsenal Ravenous Pendant. Defeating an enemy restores 3% of your maximum health every 6 seconds for 6 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. Adding stacks refreshes duration. This is the least option that you won't choose, so we're going to go ahead and stick with the potency or the endurance. I'm currently rocking the potency conduit slot, which gives us Hrimir's Arsenal Gore Stompers. Damaging or healing a target below 35% grants you 35% increased movement speed for 5 seconds after you start moving. May only occur once per minute. However, because of the potency slot, it is very similar to Hrimir's Arsenal Marrow Gemstone. Marrow Gemstone is probably one of the better options when it comes to a Soulbinds ability. After landing 10 crits, you gain 18% increased chance to crit for 10 seconds. May only occur once per 60 seconds. The DPS increase from Marrow Gemstone and a potency conduit are very, very identical. So I'm going with the Potency Conduit because it also gives me the extra additive bonus of Gore Stompers rather than an Endurance Conduit. So I'd rather have Gore Stompers. Leading us into a Potency Conduit, most likely going to be going Carver's Eye. This is pretty much guaranteed. It is better than Waking Bone Breastplate. When 3 or more enemies are nearby, your maximum health is increased by 5%. This effect lingers for 5 seconds. Carver's Eye is great. Damaging an enemy above 90% health grants you 152 mastery for 5 seconds and stacks up to 5 stacks, which is quite a lot. You cannot gain this benefit from the same target for 10 seconds though. Giving us into an endurance slot, which is better than the finesse, leaving us with mnemonic equipment. Next up, we got Plague Divisor Marileth, the second best option that you're most likely going to choose for each spec within the Necrolord faction. Very close to Ameni. It's either or, but right now there is a definite bonus when it comes to Plague Divisor. Starting off with Volatile Solvent, leading us into one of the 3 conduit slots, but we're going to be going with Potency, which gives us Ooze's Frictionless. When reduced below 50% health, Ooze curses over you, granting you a shield of 15% of your maximum health for 10 seconds. May only occur once per 30 seconds. Could have gotten Bloop. While standing still, you slowly build stacks of Bloop's Wonderlust. At 5 stacks, your movement speed is increased by 10%. Or Plaguey's Preemptive. Your first attacks or spell cast on an enemy increase your damage done to them by 10% for 10 seconds, which is great, but doesn't outweigh the Potency Conduit, and I'd rather Ooze's Frictionless than a Finesse Conduit. Leading us into an Endurance Conduit, you can choose either Kevin's Keyring or Plagueborn. Kevin's Keyring allows opening of locks that require up to 60 skill once every 12 hours. Each 1 second spent channeling Fleshcraft reduces Kevin's Keyring cooldown by 60 seconds. Then we got Plagueborn Cleansing Slime. Defeating enemies has a chance to deploy your Plagueborn Cleansing Slime, which improves the remaining durability of your armor, which I find more useful than Kevin's Keyring. Giving us a Potency Conduit slot, leading us into an Endurance or Finesse. I'm going to be grabbing that Endurance, giving us Ultimate Form and another Potency Conduit. Now, you can be going either Vicious Trail or an Undulating Maneuvers. Now, you can choose whichever one, because both of them are not going to affect you too much. In fact, it outweighs depending on what type of content you're going to play and what type of play style you do play. Vicious Trail. When stuck by a snare, you drop a puddle that lasts for 10 seconds. Enemies that step in the puddle are slowed by 70% for 5 seconds. May only occur once every 60 seconds, also giving you an endurance slot. I much prefer Vicious Trail in PvP combat, and of course the endurance is going to help as well. So PvP content, I do go Vicious Trail. And then of course we got Undulating. While above 80% health, 5% of the damage taken is absorbed and spread out over 5 seconds. I prefer this in PvE content. It does give us a finesse option, leading us into Kevin's Oozling. And last but not least, we've got Ameni. Sadly, it's not that far behind Bonesmith or Plague Divisor. In fact, this Covenant has a very, very close relationship between the 3, unlike the other 3 Covenants. The other 3 Covenants, there's an outright which Soulbinds the best, which one's in second, and which one's in third. In the Necrolord Covenant, these 3 Soulbinds are actually very, very unique in the type of abilities that they offer you. And then when it comes to damage potential, very, very close. It used to be Ameni, Plague Divisor, and Bonesmith, but right now Bonesmith beats the other 2 by a little bit. And then of course Plague Divisor, and then sadly Ameni is now the last option to choose from. But starting off by lead by example, giving us a Potency slot or an Endurance, we're going Potency into Ameni's Magnificent. We got Fleshcraft increases maximum health by 5% for 30 seconds. Could have gotten Ameni's Ambulatory. You may channel Fleshcraft while moving, so definitely we're going to go with the Potency Conduit option, leading us into a Finesse. Now we got one of 2 options here. You can choose either one. We got Cartilaginous Legs. After taking falling damage, the health loss becomes a shield, lasting for 30 seconds. However, sadly, I don't have a mini anymore. This option was probably the best Soulbind option of all times. Hearth Kidney Stone. You may attune your Hearth Kidney Stone to any resting location and return to it. It's absolutely freaking bangers. And then we got an Endurance slot, leading us into another Potency, or we could have gone with the other 2, but we're going Potency into Grizzled Toes. Movement speed increased by 3% for every enemy target, up to 15%. You could have went with Gnashing Chompers, gain 3% haste for 10 seconds after defeating an enemy, up to 15%. We could have gone with Sulfuric Emission. When reduced below 20% health, your fear nearby enemies for 3.5 seconds may only occur once every minute. Leading us into a Potency Conduit. Could go either Soul Slow or Resilient Stitching, but I prefer Resilient Stitching in almost every combat scenario. Soul does, after standing still for 5 seconds, the next time you move, you and your nearby allies gain 20% increased movement speed, which is nice, and it leads us into an endurance slot. However, I prefer Resilient Stitching. While above 90% health, you gain a shield that absorbs magic damage for 1 minute. This effect may only occur every minute as well. Finesse option, leading us into the last ability of Pustule Eruption. Up is the Night Fae with Naya, Dreamweaver, and Karain. Now when it comes to Naya, you're going to be starting off with Grove Invigoration, leading you into a Potency Conduit and an Endurance Conduit. We're going to go Potency, which gives you Run Without Tiring. While in Soul Shape, you regenerate 5% of your maximum health every 3 seconds. Could have gone with Stay on the Move. Soul Shape's cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds, and defeating an enemy reduces Soul Shape's cooldown by 1 second. I'm not going to take too much advantage of that, so of course Potency into Run. Giving us a Finesse option. You can choose either or Nature's Splendor or Swift Patrol. Nature's Splendor, you have a chance to obtain leather, meat, and fish while you kill an enemy that yields honor or experience. However, Swift Patrol movement speed is increased by 20% for 2 minutes after defeating an enemy. Combat cancels this effect. I much prefer that. Endurance Conduit slot, leading you into one of the 3 conduits. Definitely going to be going with Potency, which gives you Naya Tools Poison. Your interrupts apply Naya's Paralytic Poison to your target. Dealing nature damage over 30 seconds, targets with Naya's Paralytic Poison take an additional nature damage if interrupted once more. Could have gotten Naya Tools Burrs. Your damaging attacks and spells have a chance to toss Naya's spiked burrs under your target. The burrs latch on to the first enemy it crosses them, reducing movement speed by 20% and inflicting nature damage over 6 seconds. Or Naya's Tools Herbs. Your healing spells and abilities have a chance to apply Naya's Invigorating Herbs, increasing the target's haste by 5% for 10 seconds. So, definitely going to go with the Potency, leading us into Naya's Tools, giving us another Potency slot. You can go either or Called Shot or Survivor's Rally. I prefer Survivor's Rally big time, but Called Shot, when you critically strike, you gain 20% movement speed for 5 seconds. Or Survivor's Rally, when you fall below 50% health, you regain 20% of your health over 10 seconds and receive 5% additional healing from other spells and abilities during this time period. Gives you a Finesse option, which is sadly a little bit worse than Endurance, but I prefer Survivors over Called. Leading us into the last ability, Bonded Hearts. Next up we got Dreamweaver, starting off with Pod Tender, leading you into an Endurance or Finesse option. Go with the Endurance, because more Endurance conduits are better than Finesse conduits as a Warlock. Leading us into Potency. We're going to be forcing the Soothing Voice. When the root, stuns, and incapacitating class effects expire or are dispelled, your target's movement speed is reduced by 90%, decaying rapidly over 2 seconds. The Potency slot outweighs the other 2. You get Social Butterfly when at least 2 allies are within 8 yards of your versatility is increased by 3% for 5 seconds. When this expires, 2 nearby allies gain 33% of this effect for 5 seconds before passing it back to you. Empowered Chrysalis, 10% of the overhealing received or done remains as a shield on the target up to 10% of the caster's health, lasting for 5 seconds. So, Soothing Voice into Potency into an Endurance. You can choose either or of these 2. Fairy Dust, when falling further than 20 yards, Fairy Dust slows your fall for the next 30 seconds. This cannot occur more often than once per minute. And then Somnambulist, after spending 60 seconds in a rested area, you gain 20% increased movement speed for 30 minutes. Giving you into Field of Blossoms and another Potency conduit. You can either choose Cunning Dreams, again this is another option depending on your playstyle. Soul Shape and Flicker slow enemies near your starting point by 50% for 6 seconds. I prefer this route with the Endurance slot for PvP content, but pretty much everything else, even a little bit of PvP, I do like Waking Dreams. When you take damage below 80% health, you gain a shield for 30% of your maximum health for 12 seconds. I just prefer Waking Dreams so I don't really have to switch back and forth too much. And then of course you get a Finesse, leading you into Dream Delver. But not least is Karain for the Night Phase, starting off with Wild Hunt Tactics. Leading you into a Potency or an Endurance slot, you're going to go with the Potency option, Horn of the Wild Hunt. Soul Shape increases movement speed of allies within 40 yards by 10%. Could have gotten Wild Hunt's Charge while out of combat. Your Soul Shape's teleport becomes a charge, studying your target for 5 seconds and ending your Soul Shape. But I just, of course, we're Warlocks, so we want to deal damage. Potency into Horn, giving us a finesse option. Now you can choose either one of these options. 4K, your weapon takes no durability damage, or get Information. Your mounted movement speed is increased by 5%. Allies behind you within 40 yards gain this benefit as well. Giving you an endurance slot and one of the 3 conduits, but we're going to be going with the potency as always. Face your foes. When in front of your target, your spells and abilities decrease the damage they inflict on you by 3% for 2 seconds. Could do First Strike, which is damaging an enemy before they damage you, increases the chance to crit by 25% for 5 seconds. Or Hold the Line. After standing still for 5 seconds, you take 15% less physical damage while you move, or until you move, sorry. So again, you're going to go potency into Face Your Foes, leading you into another potency conduit slot. You get another option choice here. You can go Hunts or 4K, it doesn't really matter too much, but 4K is after interrupting or disorienting an enemy, they deal 5% less damage to you, leading you into an endurance slot. However, I much prefer Hunts. When damaging an enemy or healing an ally within 8 yards, you gain 3% leech for 5 seconds, of course leading you into a finesse option and into Wild Hunt Stratagem. Now for Nausea, she's got Thrill Seeker, leading you into a potency or an endurance slot. Potency gives you Agent of Chaos. Door of Shadows disorients all nearby enemies at the targeted location for 6 seconds. Or Fancy Footwork, Door of Shadows increases movement speed by 40%. So you definitely want to go with your potency slot into Agent of Chaos, giving you a finesse option, giving you friends in low places, giving you an endurance slot, and one of the 3 conduits. We're going to go with the potency again with Familiar Predicaments. The duration of incoming interrupt, snare, and root effects are now reduced. Could have gone with Exacting Preparation. The benefits of Well-Fed Flask and Weapon Enchants effects are increased by 20%, which is absolutely bangers. And then Dauntless Duelist, the first enemy you damage in combat is marked as your adversary. You deal 3% more damage to them, and they'll deal 1.5% less damage to you, and you may only have one adversary at a time. Now when it comes to these 3 options, Familiar Predicaments is definitely the worst compared to the other 2. However, comparing the potency and Familiar Predicaments against the finesse and the Dauntless, the potency and Familiar Predicaments outweighs that DPS wise. However, the endurance and the exacting preparation, comparing that to the potency and Familiar Predicaments, if you're using the correct potency conduits, which we'll be going over in another video, these 2 are very, very similar. So in fact, you could go either way when it comes to this route of the talent tree. You could go potency into Familiar, or the endurance into exacting preparations, because exacting preparations is that high touch when it comes to the DPS that it's going to get from that. Leading you into a potency conduit, giving you either Sinful Preservation or Nimble Steps. Nimble Steps, enemies within 8 yards are slowed by 10%. If you fall below 35% health, enemies within 8 yards are now rooted for 4 seconds. Or Sinful Preservation, health potions and health zones grant you an absorb shield equal to 50% of the amount healed for 20 seconds. Giving you a finesse option. So you could go either or with this route as well, but I prefer Sinful Preservation into the finesse option, which leads us into Fatal Flaw. Next up we got Theotar, the Mad Duke. Soothing Shade is his first ability, giving you either an endurance or a finesse option, which kind of sucks. But we're going to go with the finesse option with Leisurely Gait, because I prefer that over the other one. Door of Shadows now has 2 charges, but sadly its cooldown is increased. But Watch of Shoes, Door of Shadows frees you from stuns, from roots and snares. In fact, you can go with either or of these options, depending on your playstyle and what suits you best. No matter what, we're going to get the Potency Conduit, which is great. You can choose either Life of the Party or Exquisite Ingredients. It doesn't really matter. Again, whatever will you prefer, because it's not going to affect you too much. Exquisite Ingredients, you have a chance to obtain an assortment of flavorful herbs and beverages when you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor. Or Life of the Party, during the Ember Court, your guests gain additional happiness for each event completed. When your court concludes, the effective decree bestowed upon you are increased. Of course, you got the Endurance slot, leading you into one of the 3, but we're going to go Potency into Token of Appreciation. Grant a shield that absorbs damage to allies who aid you with healing or beneficial magic effects. You will only shield each ally once every 20 seconds. The other options were Refined Palate, The effect of combat potions lasts 100% or to 200% longer, or Wasteland Propriety. Impending catastrophe signals the start of tea time, granting 6% versatility to you and 3% versatility to up to 4 nearby allies. Last 10 seconds. Potency into token was the best DPS wise, giving you another potency slot. You can choose either it's always tea time or life is but an appetizer. I prefer life is but an appetizer because it does help in pretty much every situation, and it gives you an endurance slot, which is usually better than the finesse. While you are well fed, gain 60 speed and 60 avoidance. It's always tea time gives you Soothing Shade activates. Tubbins and Gubbins each offer you a cup of tea, healing you for a certain amount of health every 1 second, reduces damage taken by 5% while standing in that shaded area, leading you to the last ability, Party Favors. The last one, we've got General freaking Draven. Service and Stone, leading you into an endurance or a finesse slot. I prefer the finesse option of Enduring Gloom. Door of Shadows grants you a shield that absorbs damage equal to 50% of your maximum health. You could have gotten with the endurance. Move is 1 when a nearby ally gains temporary increased movement speed. You also gain a benefit up to 30% of that. You could choose whichever option you want. None of them are going to affect you too much. It's mainly playstyle based. However, I prefer finesse into Enduring Gloom, giving you a potency conduit. Here's another option of choice. Unbreakable Body. Your equipment takes 50% less durability. And an Expedition Leader. Leave an arrested area increases mounted movement speed by 10%, and you're out of combat regenerating by 100%. Lasts 10 minutes, and completing the world quest refreshes the duration. So I much prefer that, leading you into an endurance slot in one of the 3 conduits. You're going to go potency into Hold Your Ground. Standing still for at least 4 seconds grants you 10% increased stamina and 4% increased healing done. This effect persists for 6 seconds after you start moving. Could have gotten Superior Tactics. Successfully interrupting an enemy or dispelling an ally increases crit by 10% for 10 seconds. It may only occur once every 30 seconds. Or Built for War. While you are above 80% health, you gain 1% of your primary stat every 3 seconds, stacking up to 4 times. If you fall below 50% health, the effect is lost. Not good enough to outweigh the potency conduit, and then you go ahead and forced into Hold Your Ground, leading you into a potency conduit. Now you can choose either or Regenerative Skin or Intimidating Tactics. However, I prefer Intimidating Tactics. Skin, any overhealing done to you will heal you for an additional 15% of the overhealing amount for over 6 seconds, giving you a finesse option. I prefer the Endurance Conduit anyways, but Intimidation Tactics, while below 50% health, your Door of Shadow cooldown is 50% faster. Last but not least, leading you into Battlefield Presence. Alrighty, so to finally get into the freaking recap, we're Demonology Warlocks. Your best Soulbind options, of course, are going to be coming out of the Necrolord and Night Fae Covenants. If you haven't checked out our Covenant guides, I strongly suggest you go ahead and do so. I'm releasing these guides in an order to where you guys can see the progression and they all kind of tie into each other. So again, if you're wondering what the best covenants are for Demonology, Destruction, and Affliction, I strongly suggest you go ahead and check out our Covenant guide. However, I'm kind of going to give you a hint anyways, based off of which I'm going to be putting up on the top of the list. So starting off again with Demonology Warlocks. You're going to be playing the covenants of either Night Fae and Necrolord, with those being the top 2 covenants of choice. When it comes to the Necrolord soul binding system, you're going to be going with Bonesmith, or Plague, or Ameni, in that order. So, when it comes to the Necrolord Covenant, you're going to be going with, in this order, either Bonesmith, Hirmir, you're going to go with Plague Deviser, Merileth, or you're going to be going with Ameni. Again, Ameni is sadly the worst option of the 3, with Bonesmith being the leading to go Soulbind for the Necrolords. However, this is one of those covenants to where it is strangely, all 3 of these are very, very close. Next up, you've got the Night Fae Covenant. Again, the Necrolord and the Night Faes for Demonology Warlocks are extremely close. So whichever one you're playing, you're pretty much doing the correct thing, depending on your play style, of course. For the Night Fae, you're going to be going with Naya as you're pretty much your go-to Soulbind for pretty much every certain situation. Dreamweaver at number 2 and Korain at number 3. I can see Korain being useful in some situations, however I just prefer Dreamweaver over Korain because of most situations Dreamweaver does outweigh Korain's abilities. However, Naya is pretty much your go-to when it comes to the Night Fae. Next up, we've got the Kyrian. This is pretty straightforward. Pelagos is your only good Soulbind in the Kyrian, so in pretty much everything you're going to go with Pelagos. Clea, and then Forge Light. Forge Light's just dead as the Soulbind for us. He does have his usage. You could mean spec with Demo and have a really nasty defensive capability to pretty much you just don't die, but other than that, you kind of Forge Light's kind of useless. So you're definitely gonna be going with Pelagos within the Kyrian. And then last but not least, we've got the Venthyr. Easily just the same thing as the Kyrian. You got Najia the Mistblade as your pretty much your go-to Soulbind within the Venthyr. And then you got Theotar and then General Draven. Next up for the Destruction Warlocks, your best covenant of choice. Again, very similar to Demonology. However, when it comes to Destro, I do prefer Night Fae over the Necrolords. But again, just like Demonology, both Night Fae and Necro are pretty much neck and neck at the top. It is pretty much the same order as well for the Covenants. Soulbinds, so for the Night Fae, you're going to be going with Naya, into Dreamweaver, and then into Korain. And then when it came to the Necrolords, you're going to be going with Bonesmith Hearmere as you're pretty much your go-to. Bonesmith actually plays a much better role for Destruction comparing to the other two. Unlike Demonology, they're all pretty much very, very neck and neck. Bonesmith for Destruction is kind of like absolute easy cake claps. And then you'll go with Plague Divisor and then Ameni when it comes to the Necrolords. Your next covenant would be the Kyrian, your third best covenant for the Destruction Warlocks. It's pretty much straightforward with Pelagos being your best soul binding option, Clea, and then Forge Light. And then last but not least, you got the Venthyr. You shouldn't be playing this covenant at all. However, if you are, you're going to be going with Najia, and then Theotar, and then General Draven. Last but not least, Affliction Warlocks. Don't think I forgot about you guys. Of course, you're pretty much your only go-to covenant is the Night Fae. If you are playing Affliction, whether it's PvP or PvE, you're going to be going with the Night Fae covenant system. Kyrian is a strong 2, but it is nowhere as good as the Night Fae. So starting off with the Night Fae, your best soulbind option, and pretty much every Affliction Warlock soulbinding option, you're going to be going with the Naya. Leading you into Dreamweaver or Korain as your strong second 2. Next up, you're going to be going with the Kyrian Covenant. Same as the other two specs, Pelagos is pretty much your only go-to soulbind. It is a very, very strong soulbind. That's why it's probably the best soulbind for all specs as a warlock. However, the Kyrian Covenant is not a strong go-to comparing to the other covenants, which is why Pelagos kind of doesn't see the light in day, because a lot of warlocks aren't Kyrian. However, Pelagos is your go-to if you are a Kyrian warlock, leading you into Clea and then Forge Light. Third best covenant, however, I strongly don't suggest it at all, is the Necrolords. As you guys know, I'm a huge Necrolord fan. That is currently my setup with Demonology. However, when it comes to Affliction, the Necrolords is extremely bad. And of course, the ability of Decimating Bolt is just absolutely dead in the rotation for Affliction Warlocks. However, if you are somehow playing Necrolord Affliction, you're going to be going with Bonesmith into Plague into Ameni. And then last but not least, the Covenant you shouldn't be playing at all whatsoever. Your best soulbind within the Venthyr is Najia. And then of course Theotar, and last but not least, General Draven. I just want to say thank you all very much for tuning in, and again, keep the questions going in the comment section, and if this video helped you, please go ahead and drop a thumbs up, and share this video with anyone else that you know or on social media, because that helps out an absolute ton. Please go ahead and check out the rest of our guides for Affliction, Demonology, and Destruction. Of course, we've already released our Covenant guide and now our Soulbind guide, so stay tuned for Conduits and Legendaries being the remaining 2. And of course, we'll be getting into tons of other more in-depth specific guides as well. Thank you all very much for tuning in. Catch you all next time. Peace out, everybody.